Good morning, Professor Floridi. Thank you for joining us today. This interview is part of the campaign for the recognition of the right to know, launched by the Global Committee for the Rule of Law, Marco Pannella, together with other organizations, and which is now underway at the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. And I am very honored to discuss with you today the relevance of our initiative in the contemporary age of information. In fact, as a professor of philosophy and ethics of information at the University of Oxford and director of the Digital Ethics Lab of the Oxford Internet Institute, you have been focusing on your research activities on the challenges posed by the information age to our society. Therefore, I will ask you, from your personal and specific point of view, which kind of impact digital technology as well as their applications have had on democracy?
Well, thank you, first of all, for the very kind invitation. I'm delighted to be part of this initiative and also support it. It's a great idea, and I hope it will be a successful project. The impact of digital technology is complicated, as they say. So allow me to be a bit oversimplistic and just pinpoint maybe 2 or 3 things that seems to be more fundamental. Well, first of all, digital technologies have made clear to everybody that we had been recounting a little story, not history, but story about democracy. People who are listening to this will probably remember something learned when we were all young, that democracy has to be representative because we don't live in a small city. Athens, good old days, and so on. If only we lived in a small place, etc., we could all be informed citizens, reasonable and polite urban, as they say, debate about fundamental issues and so on. Participation would be direct. That story has been going on for quite a while. It was, I think, John Stuart Mill who actually formulate that story first. Well, digital technologies have shown us that that was a bit of a white lie, as we say in English. In other words, it was just a way of saying, we really want representative democracy. We just can't tell you. In order to tell you that that's what we want, we're going to tell you a little story. Now, digital technologies today, they have shown that that story is untenable. In other words, look, we could do it now. We could have direct democracy of the mythical, never happened really, Athenian kind. We could all vote on everything, every time, every citizen. So what's wrong with that? Well, digital technology, in other words, have shown that that story was untenable to begin with. Representative democracy has always been the plan. It's just that we didn't know how to sell it, and so we invented a story that unfortunately was plan B, has always been plan A. Direct democracy, as described by some populists today, where digital technologies are enabling, so to speak, to raise your hand anytime on any issue, no matter what level of information, of debate, of critical understanding, well, that kind of populism is unacceptable. That's why we need more reflection and representative democracy. So the first impact of digital technology has been showing that what we want is this special separation between those who have the power, the people, and those who exercise the power, the politicians. That separation is essential. That's what is called representative democracy. If you unify their power in a single block, thanks also to digital technologies, then what you have is some kind of dictatorship. Maybe a dictatorship of the majority of people, but it's still a dictatorship. So point number 1, digital technology have helped us to understand much better why we want and like representative democracy. Point number 2, the counterpart, so to speak, you say, oh, well, but then can we use digital technologies for anything really? Or just to, as it were, unveil an old story for what it was, a white lie? No, they can be very powerful tools if used properly, democratically, but not to raise your hand at the end of the political process when all the games are over, all the options have already been selected and carefully crafted by someone else, and all is left to you is either this or that, but you have no other choices. That is not how we would like to use digital technology at its best. Digital technology at its best is cooking together. Not just being told that that's the menu and either you have dish A or dish B and you dislike both and you normally choose the one that you dislike the least. That's not how we would like to see a representative democracy that is truly participatory. Participation doesn't happen at the end of the political process, it happens at the beginning. So here is the twofold operation by digital technologies. On the one hand, have shown us that what we need is the separation of who owns the power, who has the power, who holds the power, and who exercises the power. So old story is gone, the white lie is no longer tenable. At the same time, it also tells us that in terms of when participation happens, it could happen and it should happen at the very beginning, not at the very end of the process, when it's too late to make a difference. It is a bit of a joke to be told that you can actually be a full citizen at the end of the decisional process, when in fact all the decisions have already been taken in terms of what menu you have in front of you. No, thank you. I would like to choose what we put on the menu to begin with. There's a third point, as I said, which is transparency and accountability. This is very much linked with the discussion we're having today, right to know. What digital technologies can do immensely better than anything else in the past is to make power transparent and therefore accountable. This is crucial because in that process of representation, remember, it's we the people, to quote the American Constitution, who hold the power. And therefore, we also hold the politicians who exercise power on our behalf accountable. Now, if you put these three things together, digital technologies are very intensely transformative with respect to democracy. Are we doing the right thing with them? Are we, in other words, showing the white lie, supporting a proper representative democracy that is participatory since the beginning? And are we making politicians more accountable through transparency? The answer is maybe, not quite, not yet. But that is the direction of traveling that this technology can actually afford us to take, if only, once again, we had the right politics to begin with.
So we can say that digital technology can contribute in a way to democracy, by enhancing a more open and inclusive form of policy making and involving citizens. However, as you mentioned, and as the saying goes, not all glitters is gold, and therefore, from your specific point of view, which are the possible downside of this contribution of the technology to democracy?
I think these days we have seen, in particular, the downside, the bad effects, the counter effects of very powerful technologies that polarize opinion, can actually pollute the infosphere, the space of information, and in the wrong hands can fuel populism. These three things, disinformation, sometimes misinformation done on purpose, not just accidentally. The power polarize so that people are less able to come to compromise, to understand each other, to see that things can actually be resolved by having a common ground. And the immensely more powerful form of populism that digital technologies have fueled, these are some of the counter effects of the digital revolution. I would like to stress here one particular point, which is in this tension, sometimes you hear that digital technologies are neutral. They can do something good or something bad depending on the use. That is naive. It's not wrong, but it's not sufficiently accurate. It is not that they are neutral, but they are charged both equally on one side or the other. The effect is the same. Imagine a rope that is being either not pulled either way or pulled by two parties both ways equally strongly. It still doesn't move, but is very brittle in terms of equilibrium. As soon as one of the party lets go, the rope will jump to the other side. So that's what digital technology are today. They are hugely polarizing. They are, unfortunately, not ecologically, in terms of infosphere, good enough, because one of the parties have let the rope go and the other one is pulling all the other way. So what we should be doing, pull again. Democracy should regain a legal, fair, socially good, environmentally sustainable use of these digital technologies, and not leave just to the market forces the use of very powerful tools that tend to, as I said, go one way in a sort of pendulum way and disregard what are the good effects for society. This polarization is what we need to counterbalance, especially in Europe, where we have the power and I hope the foresight to have decent regulations that will make this less likely and counterbalance what otherwise is going to be a very bad effect on our society and our politics.
And in light of all of this, I have my last question as how do you value the universal recognition of the right to know?
It is quite crucial. I would like to say that it's sad that we should have this conversation to begin with. In an ideal democracy, you wouldn't have to have a sort of project, a group of people pushing for the right to know, because we would have knowledge. If you pick up any utopian book of any kind, knowledge is always something that is immediately available to anyone, widespread, transparent, and so on. So unfortunately, we do not live in a utopian world. We do not live in an ideal democracy. And so it is important to fight for the right to know. At the same time, it is also crucial to understand that this is a moral judgment about what ought to be known. The right to know is exercised, of course, on anything that ought to be known, not on something that should not be known, for example, in terms of privacy or public interest. And here's the third point, if I may. Too often, both privacy and public interest are excuses to curtail the right to know. So yes, we need to have a right to know. Yes, there are limits, of course, in terms of what ought and ought not to be known. My privacy, for example, or public interest in moments of, say, fundamental crisis, of course. However, the third point is that please don't take that as an excuse not to exercise and not to implement the right to know, because the fundamental point is that knowledge is a good thing. Knowledge implements good policies. At the end of the day, more knowledge means better democracy, better politics. So privacy and public interest have to be extreme cases in which the right to know is not exercised, not the ordinary standpoint, the default position where the right to know is never exercised unless. It should be the other way around. The right to know should be the default position unless privacy and public interest need to be implemented. In which case, of course, now we want to live in a better democracy. To perhaps close this with a bit of a summary. A good democracy is one in which anyone has the right to ask any question. That is part of the right to know. No one will ever be punished for having asked any question whatsoever. However, at the same time, that democracy is also a place where no one is forced to answer any question whatsoever. The balance between these two, the right to ask any question, the right to know, and sometimes also not privacy and public interest, therefore some limits to what I pretend to know, for example, about your life. That is where a good democracy can strike a good balance. And in Europe, we can do a good job. But I would like to start with the right to have any question asked at any time, because accountability and transparency is what are sort of flourishing if that is the default position.
Well, thank you very much for your time and for your contribution.